I was asked to perhaps repeat some of the essence of the shir that I gave on the morning of Simchat Torah, about half an hour before we started getting the news of what in fact was happening. And it was almost as if there was some premonition because it was so relevant to what was happening. And tonight I want to look at it from a slightly different viewpoint and try and find some chizuk for us in what's happening as well. Because what happened on Simchas Torah and is still happening is one and the same time one of the biggest tragedies since the founding of the state that we've had to endure. And at the same time, there's an enormous amount of Nissim, of unbelievably miraculous events that are taking place as we speak, all the time. And in a sense, the Nissim of what is happening, and we can't allow one to cancel the other out. We can't ignore the Nissim because we're only looking at the tragedy, and we can't only look at the Nissim and ignore the tragedy. We have to be able to hold them both in our hands and understand two things are happening at once. We've lost a lot of precious people. We're in a difficult situation. And yet, on the other hand, some wonderful things are happening. And those wonderful things that are happening are answers to our tefillot on Sukkot and Hoshana Raba is what I want to show you, that we actually asked for certain Nissim, and what we're seeing is an answer to those prayers, to those tefillot. In so doing, we need to understand on Sukkot, the whole idea of Hoshana. Hoshana means save me, save me. Why on Sukkot? Of all times, when we're in our Sukkot, it's peaceful, it's beautiful, it's tranquil, it's a period of prosperity. We've just finished gathering in the harvest. Why are we starting to cry about Hoshana? We've got money in the bank, we're secure, we're safe. Why Hoshana? Why are we crying to Hashem to save us? To save us from what? And why specifically on Sukkot? Interestingly, also, on Hoshana Raba, the Ani v'ho Hoshiya Na. And I was asked on this Hoshana Raba, what does ho mean? Ani v'ho, what does ho mean? Where does that come from? And we'll have a look at that as well. The idea of Suka, and therefore the idea of Sukkot, is something much wider than the physical Sukkah that we build and that we sit in during Sukkot. There's an idea that goes far beyond that. Even whether we think of Sukkot as Sukkot Mamash, as the real physical Sukkot that they lived in the desert, or whether we think of it as the Ra'anana Kollel, the clouds of glory that they had in the time of the desert, it means more than both of those. There's something beyond that too. And we need to understand the beyond. We need to understand in what way the idea of Sukkot goes beyond anything physical in order to be able to take Sukkot forward with us into the year. It's hard to think about the fact that it's less than a week ago that we were sitting in our Sukkot, because so much has happened since that time. But it was only a week ago, and we want to be able to take some of that atmosphere and that specialness of Sukkot and take that into the year ahead. And to do that, we need to understand that Sukkot, the idea of a Sukkah, is certainly a protective element, whether it's the physical Sukkot that protected us from the physical elements of the weather, whether it's the Ra'anana Kollel that protected us. The idea of Sukkah is protection. The idea is that there is a force of protection around us, and that's what Sukkah means. Schach, the real essence of the word Sukkah, is that protective covering that we have. And clearly, because the Sukkah is so frail and fragile, it can't be designed to protect us from physical threats. It's just too flimsy to protect us from that. If we really wanted to protect ourselves from physical threats, this would be the time to go into the house, not to go out of the house. So clearly, the protective powers of the Sukkah are to protect us from something other than physical threat. What is that? We see the idea of Sukkah appearing. We see it several times in Tanakh, but one of the intriguing places is in Nehemiah, in the 8th perek of Nehemiah. Ezra is coming back from Bavel, and he's brought a community of people back to Eretz Israel to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash and re-establish life in Eretz Israel after the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash. And the description there is how celebratory this was, the coming back to Yerushalayim. But in that celebratory description, there's something rather disturbing. Vayasu kol hakahal hashavim min hashivi. All of the community that were returning from captivity in Bavel created a Yom Tov. They made Sukkot. Vayeshvu ba Sukkot, and they lived in the Sukkot. Ki lo asu mimei Yeshua bin Nun kol bnei Yisrael ad hayom ahu. because they had not made a period of Sukkot since the time of Yeshua bin Nun. And there was an amazing simcha that they'd come back from Bavel to Yerushalayim, and they had returned, and they were observing a Sukkot, something they hadn't done. Now, if it would say they hadn't done in all the years they were in Bavel, okay, one might understand that. But what does it mean that they hadn't done in all the time that they were in Eretz Yisrael, even since the time of Yeshua bin Nun? Since Eretz Yisrael was first conquered by Yeshua, Tanakh tells us there wasn't an example of the keeping of Sukkot. And that's something that the Gemara in Erchin on Daf Lamed Beis finds very difficult. It says, Efshar ba David v'lo asu Sukkot ad sheba Ezra? Are you trying to suggest that in the whole period of David and Shlomo HaMelech, that there was no Sukkos? In the time of Shmuel HaNavi, there was no Sukkos? In the time of Natan HaNavi, there was no Sukkos? They didn't keep Sukkot? Ad sheba Ezra, until Ezra came, and now he created Sukkot again for the first time? Surely not. Elobat says the Gemara, Sukkot in the context of Nehemiah doesn't mean the festival of Sukkot in the physical sense as we know it, but deboi rachme al yetzer da'avodah zora uvetale. Ezra did something amazing. He dedicated unbelievably passionate tefillah to the request that the yetzer hara for avodah zora, the desire for idolatry, should be taken away, that the attractiveness of idol worship should be removed, and that people should find it easier to dedicate themselves to the singular avodas Hashem, to the service of God. Va'agen zchut alayhu ki Suka. And the zchut of Ezra protected them from this yetzer hara of avodah zorah as a Sukkah protects people. So again, we get this idea of the protective covering that Sukkah is, and it has this effect of protecting people, but protecting them again, not from a physical threat, protecting them from an inner threat, from something that was threatening them from within. Because what is a yetzer hara? A yetzer hara doesn't come from outside. A yetzer hara is something which is inside us. We have this desire. We have this tendency. We have this weakness. And so Ezra asks for us to be protected against our own weaknesses, the weakness for avodah zorah. And agin zchuta alayhu ki Suka. And in fact, that turned out to work. And this attractiveness to idolatry was removed. And it was easier for Am Yisrael to observe avodas Hashem in a more faithful way. And the Gemara goes on to say, V'hainu dekakapit kro iloyed Yeshua. And if you read the psukim carefully in Nehemiah, says the Gemara, you will notice that the Gemara is really angry with Yeshua, that Yeshua did something wrong. He missed an opportunity. Because whenever Yeshua's name is mentioned in Tanakh, it's Yehoshua. You remember he was first Hoshea bin Nun, and then Moshe changed his name to Yehoshua. He adds letters from Hashem's name into the name of Yeshua. But when he's referred to in this posuk in Nehemiah, he's now referred to Yeshua. The Hey and the Vav is taken out of his name. We understand why Moshe didn't pray to Hashem that this tendency for avodah zorah should be removed. We understand that because Moshe didn't come into Eretz Yisrael. But Ela Yeshua, the Havale is Israel, but Yeshua, who came into Israel and brought the people with him into Israel, he had an opportunity to get rid of the Yetzer hara for avodah zorah, and he didn't do it. Why didn't he daven for that? So Yeshua misses the opportunity, and he loses 2 letters from his name. And that's what we daven for in the Hoshiya Na and in the Hoshana. Hoshana, save us with the Hey Vav. Ani vaho, Hoshiya Na. Bring that Hey and Vav that Yeshua lost back into our national psyche. Bring that into being part of us, that we can reestablish that which Ezra brought us and Yeshua lost. And what was that? That's the Hey and the Vav. The Hey and the Vav are the last 2 letters of Hashem's name, of the Yud Kei Vav Kei, and they are the letters that represent bringing Hashem down into the world and infusing Kedusha, the Kedushas Hashem, the sanctity of Hashem, into the world. Whereas the first 2 letters of Hashem's name, the Yud and the Kei, represent Hashem at his essence, Hashem at his core. The Vav and the Kei of the second part of his name represent bringing Hashem and infusing Hashem into the world. And that was the piece that Yeshua didn't succeed in doing. It's something that Ezra was able to do. So when we say on Sukkot, Ana Hashem Hoshiya Na, Ani Vaho Hoshiya Na and Hoshana Raba, what we're saying is this is our opportunity to rid ourselves of the Yetzer Hara, of Avodah Zarah, of idolatry, the way that Ezra rid us of it, and the way that Yeshua did not rid us of it. This is our opportunity to do so. And very often we think of Avodah Zarah as something ancient and archaic that people had a desire for at that time, but don't have a desire for it today. But what I want to ask you to do is to cast your minds back 1 week. That's all. 2 weeks. And again, it's just so hard because we're in such a different world. So much has happened in the last few days, the last 5 or 6 days. Our world has changed. Our world has been turned upside down. The world isn't the same. Our world is not the same as it was a week ago. So it's not that easy to cast your mind back to what it was a week ago. But think of the fact that only a week ago we were still living in what was probably the most divisive era of our people since the building of the state, since the founding of the state. Maybe in the early stages there was a level of divisiveness that was similar to this, but the divisiveness that we've seen particularly over the last year, has been such that something that we didn't know. I mentioned on Tisha B'Av that the hatred that we started to see in Israel, in the streets, in the media, and not just on the left, it was on all sides. That hatred was not sinat chinam, you remember I spoke about on Tisha B'Av. Sinat chinam is when people hate for no particular reason, but this was hatred based on an ideology. This is a hatred of people who believe they're right, who believe the others are wrong, who believe there's only one way to build the country, to build the state, and that every other way threatens it. And not only wasn't it sinat chinam, as I explained on Tisha B'Av, it was actually, there was gilui arayot in the way we were going about things, the flagrant disinterest of preserving standards of tzniut, certainly in public places and nationally public places. Issues of shfichut damim, the way characters are assassinated. Instead of having debates with people around issues, we're destroying people's reputations and assassinating their character. That's a form of shfichut damim. And certainly Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah is when you build an ideology, a value system, to replace that of the Torah. And if we look at what's happening with democracy and with liberalism, it's not just the absence of Torah. It's not just an atheism. It's an ideology in and of itself. It becomes the religion. Democracy and freedom and liberalism, they become the new religion. That is Avodah Zarah. Not that we incorporate it into the Torah where it fits, that where the Torah allows for these freedoms and where the Torah allows for that level of democracy, we incorporate it in our country. We're talking here about where that becomes the value system, where that becomes all we believe in. And was that not where we were living in? And the intolerance of the religious for the irreligious and the irreligious for the religious. People were sabotaging the country, promoting disinvestment, promoting emigration, promoting military desertion. And we were ripping the country apart in ways we couldn't see it just 1 week ago. We couldn't see ways around this. How are we ever going to bring this country together again? How are we going to bring people together again? How are we going to build the kind of nation we need to build for what stands ahead of us? And that was our tefillah on Sukkot. We davened Hoshiya Na, and we davened Hoshana on Hoshana Raba. On Friday, we davened Hoshiya Na and Hoshana, and Ani Vaho Hoshiya Na. We davened Ribono Shel Olam, bring back our commitment, remove the Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah. Remove this desire of Jewish people to want to serve everything except our own Torah, to want to be at the forefront of every ideology, of every progressive thought and idea, except the Torah itself. Help us remove that. That's what the Hoshanas were about. And we saw this come to its height during Yom Kippur, where we saw the terrible activities in Tel Aviv, the hatred against the religious, and again, both sides. Nobody's clear of this, nobody's clean of this. But it was only Yom Kippur, only a couple of weeks ago, that things got so bad that even people on the left felt this has gone too far. This isn't okay, in fact. And come Sukkot, and we sit in our Sukkot, and we take our lulav and esrog, and we daven for unity, and we daven for peace, and we daven for a nation that is committed to Hashem. And then what happens? Yeshuot Hashem ke'eref ayin. The next day, Hoshana Raba is on Friday. The next day, the Jewish people are united. The next day, people are davening with all their hearts. The next day, people are turning to Hashem. The next day, we're no longer talking about disinvestment and emigration. People are rushing to serve in the army. The next day, we've stopped hating one another. We've stopped talking about the religious and the non-religious. There are bigger things to worry about. And we become united in something that's much more important. So what are we to do at this point? How do we take the good of what has happened? Because look at the enormous korban we're paying. What a sacrifice we're having to make because we couldn't bring this about ourselves. What a sacrifice we're having to pay to bring unity, to bring achdus, to bring a oneness of intent and of purpose into Am Yisrael. What can we do to make sure that we're able to move forward and not pay these endless korbanot? And I think there are a few things. The first is we have to be careful, as I mentioned in an article this week, that our anger doesn't translate into hate and vengeance. Yes, we're angry, and so we should be. And we demand justice, and we demand din, and we want deterrence. We want to make sure that this can never happen again. And we want to make sure that Hamas is annihilated. That's all fine, but it's very easy for that to descend into a very primitive form of hatred and desire for vengeance. And then we're on a slippery slope. We've got to stay the Jewish people. We're doing this, and we're going into this war as an avodas Hashem. We're going into this war as a service of Hashem. This is what we need to do. This is the right thing to do. Din is a midah of Hashem. Justice and law and punishment is an attribute of Hashem himself. This is not only humans who do this. And we have to do this. This is something we have to do. And we do it with a heavy heart, that there has to be loss of innocent life in what we're doing. But we know we have to do it, and we'll do that with a spirit of optimism and a knowledge of victory and a determination to do that which is right, that which Hashem wants us to do. And we'll do it with our tefillot, with davening to Hashem and being close to Hashem. And we'll do it with all the amazing acts of chesed that we're seeing around us every day, just pouring out acts of love and acts of chesed. These are the things that we can do to make sure that our anger does not deteriorate into hate and vengeance. And then when the job is done, we need to think of Eretz Yisrael, and hopefully we'll have a new part of Eretz Yisrael that we might have to take care of, and to think of it not through a lens of kibush, of conquest, but to think of our mastery of Eretz Yisrael through the lens of chazaka. And I explained on Shabbat morning that the difference between Kedusha Rishona and the later Kedusha, the Kedusha that Eretz Yisrael gained through Yeshua coming into Eretz Yisrael, and the Yeshua and the Kedusha that came later, the Rambam explains is the difference between Kedusha that came through kibush, that came through conquest, and Kedusha that came through chazakah. And chazakah means strengthening. Chazakah means investing in. It means building. You perform a chazakah on a piece of property by fencing it, by working the land, by closing up gaps in the fences, repairing it, fixing it. That's what chazakah is. Chazakah is fix and repair. And we need to know that part of our responsibility as we move into a new reality, and the army and the government is telling us things will not be the same after this is done. We will be in a new reality, hopefully in a more peaceful reality. But in that reality, to be sure that our relationship to Eretz Yisrael is not one of kibush, where we hold on to it just because we've conquered it, but our relationship to Eretz Yisrael is one of chazakah. We hold on to it because we're invested in it. We're building in it, reinforcing it in every way possible, building life in it, building aliveness in it, building Torah in it, building chesed in it. All the things that we want to see in our nation is what we'll do in Eretz Yisrael, and thereby bring in a Kedushat Eretz Yisrael that is not based on kibush, on conquest, but one that is based on chazakah. So we each have a part to play in these very difficult times ahead of us. And that is to keep our inner place in check, that our inner place remains one of having to do what we have to do, of din, of mishpat, of justice, of deterrence, but chas v'shalom, not one of hate. And to love and support, as I mentioned in the last clip that I put out about this, is to love and support our soldiers as we see the nation is doing. They need that love and support, and they will need it more and more. They don't only need the equipment that makes them successful, they need the love and support of the nation, and that's something we need to give them. And the love and support of our community, not just those that are on the borders fighting for us, but the people who are at home keeping things going. They too need our love and support. We're all going to get somewhat drained by this. We're all going to be tired. We're all going to have moments of sadness. And our own loved ones, not to ignore the people closest to us, the people in front of us. We become so busy supporting the soldiers on the borders, which we have to do, and our communities, which we have to do, that we forget about our own children, our husbands and our wives, and to understand that all of us need chizuk, that all of us need that love and that support. A love and support of Am Yisrael, a love and support of Eretz Yisrael, the love and support which will make sure that the horrible korbanot we've already had to pay will be for something worthy, not for waste. But it will be for establishing an Eretz Yisrael, a land of Israel, an Am Yisrael, that operates on a much higher spiritual, religious, and moral level than we've ever operated before. Because then all of this will have been worthwhile. And our tefillot of Hoshana and Aniva Ho Hoshiya Na, the bringing back of the Ho that Yeshua lost and Ezra restored, bringing back those last two words of Hashem's name, bringing the Kedusha of Hashem's essence into the world, into our daily lives, into the way we deal with one another and we interact with one another, will be the opportunity to build our nation into something it hasn't ever been before. I hope that we all hear good news, that whatever has to happen, happens relatively quickly and with as little loss of life as can possibly be, that all of your families stay safe, emotionally safe and physically safe, and that as communities we stay spiritually safe. We're careful that our tefillah and our learning Torah and our mitzvot are at the highest level we can possibly keep it as Am Yisrael goes through these difficult times. Thank you for joining me and for joining the learning this evening. Shabbat Shalom and good Shabbos to everybody.